For centuries, pirates and the Royal Navy were locked in an endless struggle across the world's oceans. One side represented freedom, plunder, and rebellion. The other represented law, order, and the crown. But beyond the Hollywood myths and dramatic tales of treasure and sword fights, the real conflict was far more complicated, far more brutal, and far more interesting. Understanding this clash isn't just about learning history. It's about understanding how power moves across the seas, how organization defeats chaos, and how empires try to maintain control over waters they can't fully see. Before we dive into the specifics of their conflicts, we need to understand who these people actually were and what they wanted. Pirates weren't mindless criminals or random villains. They were usually desperate men, escaped slaves, failed merchants, or soldiers who'd been cast aside by their governments. Many had legitimate grievances. Some were privateers commissioned by nations to raid enemy ships. Others were simply trying to survive in a world where the odds were stacked against them. During the Golden Age of Piracy, from roughly the 1650s to the 1730s, piracy wasn't a fringe activity. It was an alternative economy, a way for men to accumulate wealth and power outside the traditional hierarchies that locked them out. The Caribbean and Indian Ocean became pirate strongholds because they offered distance from European authority, islands to hide in, and shipping routes full of fat merchant vessels carrying valuable cargo. The Royal Navy, on the other hand, represented centralized power. These were trained military forces backed by governments, funded with tax money, and equipped with the best ships and weapons money could buy. They existed to protect trade routes, maintain territorial control, and project national power across the globe. The Navy was professional, hierarch, ice-hail, and accountable to kings and queens. A Navy captain followed orders, answered to admirals, and operated under rigid naval codes. The two groups were fundamentally different in every way that mattered, and that difference shaped everything about how they fought and how their conflict would ultimately resolve. What gave pirates their edge was their speed and agility. A pirate ship, usually fast and relatively small, could chase down merchant vessels and escape from larger warships. Pirates crewed their ships with men willing to fight for a share of the plunder, and they moved quickly through the waters, striking where the Navy wasn't expecting them. They knew the hidden coves of the Caribbean, the fog-laden waters off Newfoundland, and the treacherous reefs where larger naval vessels couldn't follow. Pirate captains like Blackbeard and Henry Morgan became legends because they exploited these advantages ruthlessly. They used intimidation as a weapon, knowing that flying a pirate flag often made merchant sailors surrender without a fight. A ship bristling with cut-down rigging, bristling with cannons, with a crew of desperate and brutal-looking men, was something that made perfectly rational people give up their cargo without risking their lives. Think about it from a merchant sailor's perspective. You're working for pennies. Your captain asks you to fight back against men who have nothing to lose, and you see their ship approaching. You might think twice. Pirates also operated outside the law, which meant they could be flexible and adaptive. They didn't follow naval regulations about how to fight, where to sail, or what targets were acceptable. They could attack during storms, in shallow waters at night, or any time they had the advantage. They could appear suddenly from any direction and disappear just as fast. They could sail near enemy ports without fear of formal consequences because they had no national flag, no official status, no rules to bind them. This flexibility was their greatest strength, and for decades it made them nearly impossible to deal with. The Royal Navy had something far more powerful: organization and resources. The Navy had the backing of the Crown, which meant unlimited funding, advanced shipbuilding, and the ability to deploy forces across multiple regions simultaneously. Naval ships were larger and more heavily armed than pirate vessels, with crews trained as disciplined soldiers, not desperate men. Navy crews understood gunnery, navigation, and naval tactics under experienced officers. The Navy could coordinate hunting parties across continents, share intelligence about pirate movements through official channels, and establish permanent patrols. When a naval ship caught a pirate vessel in open water, the outcome was predictable. The Navy would win through superior firepower, training, and organization. The Navy also had legitimacy and institutional support. When Navy ships confiscated cargo, they operated under the law. When pirates did the same, it was criminal piracy punished by hanging and execution. Entire crews could be publicly executed as warnings. The Navy could resupply at any port in its nation and relied on coastal fortifications and naval stations. Pirates had to scavenge, hide from authorities, and operate from secret bases the Navy actively hunted and destroyed. Every pirate base was ultimately temporary. The most famous confrontations between pirates and the Navy happened when these advantages came into direct conflict. When Blackbeard was cornered off the coast of North Carolina in 1718, he faced the HMS Pearl and HMS Lime, government vessels sent specifically to hunt him down. Blackbeard fought viciously, and the battle was brutal, but the Navy's superior numbers and firepower overwhelmed his ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. Blackbeard was killed along with several crew members. His remaining crew was captured, and his ship was seized and later refitted for the Royal Navy. That single encounter marked a turning point. It showed that no pirate, no matter how fearsome or experienced, could beat the Navy in direct combat. Blackbeard had terrorized the American coast for months, but when the Navy finally committed serious resources to his capture, he was finished in a single afternoon. Another famous case was the capture of Captain Kidd in the Indian Ocean. Kidd wasn't a simple pirate, but a privateer who turned to piracy. The Navy hunted him relentlessly for years using informants, coordinated patrols, and information sharing between ports. When they finally caught him, he was brought back to England, tried in court, convicted, and executed publicly. His body was hung in chains as a warning to others. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a systematic pattern. Throughout the early 1700s, the Navy conducted systematic campaigns against pirate havens and individual pirates. They attacked Port Royal in Jamaica, ending one of the largest pirate colonies. They hunted pirates in the Caribbean and along the American coast. They established permanent naval stations specifically to combat piracy. The Navy's strategy was consistent and relentless. Make piracy unprofitable and deadly by increasing the odds of capture and execution. They advertised their victories in newspapers, displayed hanged pirates in public places where sailors would see them, and spread information about their patrol routes, so merchants would hire naval escort services instead of shipping cargo alone. The decline of piracy wasn't because pirates suddenly disappeared or lost their nerve. It was because the Royal Navy systematically and methodically made piracy impossible and economically unviable. As the 18th century progressed, the Navy's presence grew stronger in every ocean where piracy had flourished. More ships patrolled the oceans constantly. Communication between naval bases improved through official channels and written reports, allowing forces to coordinate faster and share information about pirate movements. Merchant ships began traveling in organized convoys protected by armed escort vessels, making them much harder targets. Coastal settlements were fortified with garrisons and cannons. Pirates who once could disappear into the hidden reefs of the Caribbean found that the Navy had established permanent bases and lookout posts right there with them in Antigua, Jamaica, and other strategic locations. Pirate havens like Tortuga and Port Royal, once thriving communities of hundreds or thousands of pirates, were destroyed militarily or occupied by Navy forces. The informal infrastructure that allowed piracy to flourish, the safe ports, the ability to sell stolen goods, the recruitment networks, the repair facilities, simply ceased to exist. Many surviving pirates faced an impossible choice. They either retired with their plunder if they'd been successful, took amnesty offers when the Navy offered them, or were captured and hanged in public executions that were extensively publicized. By the 1730s, the Golden Age of Piracy was effectively and completely over. Individual pirates would continue to operate in isolated regions for decades afterward, but the era when pirate fleets could challenge merchant shipping on a massive scale, when they could threaten major trade routes and when they could build settlements and operate relatively openly with significant political power, had decisively ended. The Royal Navy's superior organization, enormous funding, and ruthless commitment to eliminating piracy had achieved complete victory. The Royal Navy's victory was complete and systematic. It wasn't flashy or memorable like the stories of Blackbeard or Morgan. It was bureaucratic, organizational, and utterly unstoppable. The Navy had patience, resources, and the backing of nations. Pirates, for all their individual cunning and bravery, were ultimately limited by the fact that they were operating against the entire institutional weight of global empires. By the 1740s, piracy had become rare enough that it was no longer a serious threat to commerce. The age of legendary pirates on the high seas was over. If you found this history as fascinating as I did, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Drop a comment down below telling me which era of piracy you find most interesting, or if you'd rather face Blackbeard or the Royal Navy. Ring the bell for more history videos, and thanks so much for watching.